I'll be a friend. I'll help you carry on. For it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. Please swallow your pride. If I have things you need to borrow, for no one can fill those of your needs that you won't let you lean on me. When you're not strong, I'll be a friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. You just call on your brother when you need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. I just might have a problem that you'll understand. We all need somebody to lean on me. When you're not strong, I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on, lean on, lean on, lean on.
Good morning and welcome everyone to online worship at Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Dana Edwards, your intern minister, and my pronouns are she and her. Please know that whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you're joining us from, whatever your beliefs, gender identity and expression, immigration status, or life circumstances, we welcome you to worship. If you're joining us for the first time today, please let us know in our live chat. If you're new or feel like new, you're invited to complete the newcomer form that will be linked in the chat. Our pastoral visitors are an extension of our ministry team, and they're available in the chat to support you today. I do have a few announcements. We have a conversation with Reverend Barry Lynn, former executive director of Americans United, about his upcoming book, Why You Don't Know Me, on Tuesday, August 11th at 7 p.m. Reverends Nancy McDonald Ladd and Abi are hosting a two-session orientation to Unitarian Universalism on Sunday, August 16th and August 23rd. From 2 to 2:30 p.m., called Beginning and Belonging. If you are new, feel new, or would like to renew your understanding of Unitarian Universalist history, theology, spirituality, and practice, you are welcome in this class. The link to register will be in the chat. We'll be having a congregational check-in with Abi and the senior staff on Thursday, August 13th at 7 p.m. And please mark your calendars for the Kiplinger Lecture with Dr. John King, former Secretary of Education in the Obama administration, on Wednesday, August 26th at 7 p.m. I now invite you to say hello to your neighbors in the chat.
Good morning. I am Michael Thoryn, today's worship associate, and I am lighting my chalice today in Wheaton, Maryland. As I read our chalice lighting words, I invite you to share in the chat where you are lighting your chalice. Across the distance, the light from within me shines, sending love to all. Across the distance, your light is fuel that warms me and helps to keep my own light burning. Together, we keep the flame of community burning bright. My wife, Patricia Phillips, and I love Claire's sermons, and we're proud she is offering the reflection today. She went to Harvard Divinity School and was ordained at Cedar Lane in 2007. She has been the senior and only minister at mid-sized Follen Community Church in Lexington, Massachusetts for the past 7 years. She is married with 2 children. Her oldest is starting middle school next month. Lauren, our younger daughter, is a conference and event planner at a DC-based trade association. Our daughters are on their own, responsible adults with their own homes, their own partners, children, careers, and even their own financial advisors. I see them regularly, but virus precautions mean visits are not as frequent as I would like. A July family week in Rehoboth Beach was sadly canceled. Claire and Lauren don't turn to us for advice on child rearing or major life decisions for that matter, but there was this one time when someone did seriously seek my parenting advice. Ministers, if they have anyone to turn to, rarely lead services the Sunday after Christmas. That's why Claire, the intern minister at the Unitarian Church of Summit, New Jersey in 2004, led a small service that morning. Pat and I were recognized as visitors and Claire's parents. It might have been the first time I saw her lead a service and give the sermon. Afterwards, while still in the sanctuary, a serious man in his 30s walked up to me. "I have a young child," he said. "How did you raise such a good daughter?" My stumbling response was that we were lucky, which was not what he was looking for. He wanted foolproof tips. So I said we had family dinners at 6 p.m. with no interruptions allowed. I struggled for something else and came up with this. We only had one television. When anyone wanted to watch TV, they had to be in the living room. We were a reading family. We didn't watch much TV. I have no idea if my advice was followed. But if no TV in the room is my best advice, it's now way out of date. Smartphones, which might be a teenager's first love, can be used everywhere, privately and silently. Being a parent is an enormous responsibility. Pat and I did the hard work together. There is no easy path to good parenting. Just do the best you can. I'm definitely glad the pressure is off. And yet, I wish my adult children needed me more. I wish I was closer to the emotional center of their lives. But isn't the goal from babyhood to create independent, productive human beings? Love them, raise them, and then, if you are lucky, watch them fly away. I'm glad my daughters are contributing their gifts to the world.
This week marks the 75th anniversary of the atomic bombs being dropped on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a young girl who was a victim of the attack in Hiroshima. Let me tell you the story of my friend, Sadako Sasaki. It all began on a sunny morning in August in 1945. We were playing on the banks of the river. We ate rice balls and lay in the grass. We heard chirping crickets nearby, and we tried to catch them, but Sadako's tiny hands were too slow. Then a huge black cloud came. It brought fire and heat and destroyed everything around us. Nothing was left but gray ash. 10 years later, that cloud was almost forgotten when Sadako became ill. She had to go to the hospital, and the cloud was to blame. Sadako knew it, but she was not afraid. Her brother had told her an old legend. If you fold 1,000 paper cranes, he said, you'll get to make a wish. Sadako wanted nothing more than to get well. So every day she folded cranes. And though each one she folded made her happier, the effort took a great deal of her strength. Her family became worried. I lay with her and tried to hide the fear I felt for Sadako. When she had finished 500 cranes, Sadako hung them over her bed. They were so beautiful. While she kept folding more cranes, I told her stories. Stories about things I knew she loved. Sadako, your mother will make us some delicious green tea. We will take walks in the park, and in the spring, we'll look at the cherry trees in bloom. We'll go skipping through the rain and jumping in every puddle we see. We'll travel to the ancient arch in the water. And then we'll come home on the back of a giant dragon. But Sadako never came home. She gently fell asleep and flew away with 1,000 paper cranes. I was left alone. I didn't understand why Sadako had to die. She had fought so bravely. I decided to do all the things we had wanted to do together. In my thoughts, Sadako was always with me. At the end of my journey, I understood that our time together would forever have a place in my heart. Now, I carry Sadako's story out into the world. And I wonder what stories you carry with you in your heart. I wonder what stories you will carry into the world. And I invite you to join us in prayer for all of the victims of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Beloved Spirit, who is within us and surrounds us, we come to you today filled with sorrow and grief as we remember the hundreds of thousands of lives lost in the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki 75 years ago this week. We come to you with pain in our hearts as we speak the unspeakable truth.
that the cruelty of some humans is the main source of suffering for other humans. We come to you knowing that the consequences of warfare don't end with a single blast, but ripple for generations. Beloved Spirit, who knows all and loves us anyway, we ask for your forgiveness for the atrocities that were committed in our name by our government. We ask that you keep us energized and hopeful so that we may continue to use the energy of our righteous anger for good. We ask that you forever keep the stories of the young people who died from the atomic bombs in Japan on our lips so that humanity never forgets. We ask for strength and commitment to act, to stop the nuclear end of the world, to urge our leaders to advance policies that reduce the threat of nuclear weapons, to stop their spread and lead to their elimination. May Sadako Sasaki's wish for world peace finally become true. May it be so.
Each Sunday, we give and receive an offering to support the promise and practice of our UU faith. The offering is a visible symbol of our commitment and our covenant to our faith, to our religious community, to each other, and to the world. Our offering reminds us that our congregation belongs to us, to each of us individually, as well as the whole of us. It is a weekly embodiment of the idea that a group working together for justice and love is more exponentially powerful than any one individual. You can give by electronic means with text, online giving, PayPal, and QR code, or by mailing your check to the church. Thank you for your generosity. Our offering will now be given and gratefully received. Thank you to our children's choir for sharing their gifts, and to all of those in our music ministry. Thank you. Let us center ourselves, inviting our mind, body, and spirit into this space made sacred by our presence and the presence of the holy, in which we live, move, breathe, and have our being. In this sanctuary of caring that connects us across space and time, we hold in our hearts those for whom parenting is their primary spiritual practice. Those who are mourning a loss, those who are living with grief and chronic pain, with illnesses seen and unseen, those with mental illness and addiction, and those who have suffered abuse or injustice, as well as those who have experienced job loss or face financial insecurity. Within our Cedar Lane community, we mourn the passing of longtime member Phyllis Richter last week at the age of 99. The Warman family is grieving the loss of Tim's mother, Frances Warman. She was 90 years old and lived in a retirement community in Hingham, Massachusetts. Frances died Friday, July 31st, after 10 days of palliative care in the hospital. The family had a private Zoom gathering and is planning for a full memorial service in 2021 in Bel Air, Maryland, when it is safe to gather. We hold them in our thoughts and prayers. Candace and Dave Haga's niece, Abigail, and husband Theo in California are expecting their child to be born in February of 2021, giving their child Iggy a sibling. They plan to move to Massachusetts soon to be near other family. And we celebrate with Stephanie Williams, who was featured in the American Association of Physics Teachers this past week in their member spotlight. And our caring extends beyond Cedar Lane to others whose lives are lost and whose lives are impacted by the violence and the COVID pandemic in our nation and in the world. We hold in our hearts those impacted by the explosion in Lebanon, where over 150 people were killed and hundreds were injured. We hold in our hearts those impacted by Hurricane Isaias, which further exacerbated the stress and challenges of living in these times. Holding them, holding all the joys and sorrows we bring, let us spend some time together in silence. During this silence, those who are mourning a loss or marking the anniversary of a loss are invited to rise and share a loved one's name in the chat, in mourning and in memory.
Good morning, Cedar Lane. It is always a joy to have the chance to be with you again, and the commute this time couldn't be beat. I am Claire Feingold Thoryn. I am the minister at Follen Church in Lexington, Massachusetts. Thank you for having me today. Our reading is a community poem that my congregation wrote. It was inspired by an NPR segment in which folks were invited to create a community poem by finishing this sentence. What I'm learning about grief is Members of Follen Church posted their replies to this poem in our Facebook group and emailed them to me, and then I braided all their responses together to create this poem. This is what we in our community are learning about grief. What I'm learning about grief. Grief is a tangled knot in my body, in my heart, in my soul. I must carefully tease it apart, one strand at a time. Grief lives in my body, bindweed tendrils wrapped around my spine and nervous system, white trumpet-flowered vines twining counterclockwise, climbing upwards, seeking light. What I'm learning about grief is it can slam you in the gut, create a dull ache in your lower back, or a general feeling of offness. It encircles your heart and makes it pound relentlessly when you awake. Grief suffocates your breath and all your words get choked off. What I'm learning about grief is that it can be overwhelming and filled with heartache at times, like waves crashing and then surprisingly subsiding. Grief is sometimes a boulder and at other times a stream with both branches and beauty. It can be white hot or a shade of gray. What I am learning about grief is that it is numbing and that it too wants to be free and flow towards compassion, and that it takes courage to feel the oh so painful tenderness as it moves. What I am learning about grief is that it is raw and tender and unpredictable. What I'm learning about grief is that it isn't only about death. Grief comes at 3 a.m. like bad news and shakes me awake and shows me a long list of beloved people lost recently and long ago. Sometimes it is gentle and wrapped in good memories. Sometimes it's a gut punch that leaves me breathless and nauseated. Grief is the loss of things that haven't happened yet and won't. Grief taught me what forever means. Grief is elusive. I thought I had mourned you. Why are you here now? Grief is change. It will simply never be the same. What I'm learning about grief is that my pain and suffering can look and feel so different from yours. Suffering is suffering. Grief is the inescapable corollary of love, beginning with our first howl. Grief teaches me that without love, loss is an empty space. The deeper the love, the deeper the grief. Grief makes life more real when I find it in the cracks between moments, in this long, soft spring when I smell the wild apples. What I'm learning about grief is that sometimes it comes on slowly and catches you by surprise. Even when I am free of it, the sounds of others wailing haunts me. Here ends the reading.
Warm summer sun, shine kindly here. Warm southern wind blows softly here. Green sun son of
William Blake told us, "Joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. It is right it should be so. We were made for joy and woe." Last summer, I was very lucky to have sabbatical, and I took part in a long walk across the Irish Burren with the poet David Whyte. David Whyte, like a lot of poets, is always saying something profound off the top of his head. And he said something on that walk that has been on my mind during this pandemic time. He was talking about rituals, and he said that ritual is what we have built up to ensure we won't die. We greet the sun, we greet each other, we mark milestones, we have special objects and special arrangements for those objects, special words, special actions, weddings, funerals, rituals that mark our most sacred times. Our rituals right now are interrupted, disrupted, changed. We gather here on Zoom and try to grab hold of that feeling of reverence we receive from taking part in rituals in person. Between what is and what was, what the future holds, and what we wish it held, there is loss. We grieve the loss of life, of livelihoods, and of so many other things. Revolutionary love activist Valerie Kaur wrote recently, "With grief, there is no fixing it, only bearing it." And even in this time of physical distancing, we can find ways to bear it together. Author and Lutheran minister Nadia Bolz-Weber shared something she's learned about letting go of false optimism and accepting grief. She learned from U.S. Navy Admiral James Stockdale, who spent 8 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and from Damien Eccles, who spent 18 years on death row for a crime he did not commit. Bolz-Weber points out, obviously stay-at-home orders and social distancing and the canceling of events is not even remotely close to prison. But those who have grown as people and not devolved as people during incarceration might just have some helpful wisdom for us right now. U.S. Navy Admiral James Stockdale survived these 8 years as a prisoner of war, and when he was asked who of his fellow prisoners struggled to make it out alive, he replied this: "The optimists. Oh, they were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas," and Christmas would come and Christmas would go. And then they'd say, we're going to be out by Easter, and Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again, and they died of a broken heart. So what is now called the Stockdale paradox is the ability to hold two opposing but equally true things at once. You must have faith that you will prevail in the end. And at the same time, you must confront the brutal facts of your current reality. Faith that you will prevail in the end while confronting the facts of reality. Damien Eccles is one of the West Memphis Three, about whom the documentary series Paradise Lost was based. As an 18-year-old, he was wrongfully convicted of murder. He was interviewed by Jason Flom, who asked what wisdom Damien might offer as someone who had spent half his life on death row before being freed. And Eccles said, "The number one thing that helped me stay sane was figuring out that I could not live for the future. When it came down for me, what it came down to for me in prison was having to create a life for myself, not making myself insane, constantly wondering, when is this going to be over?" Whether it's news about the pandemic or your possible upcoming execution date, you can't sit around dwelling on that stuff, or you're going to stew in fear and misery. With grief, there is no fixing it, only bearing it. We will bear this together. We have to. Grief teaches us what forever means. The deeper the love, the deeper the grief. Grief makes life more real. Joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. It is right it should be so. We were made for joy and woe. I pray for all of us that we are able to live within this paradox, that we wrap ourselves steadfast in this finely woven cloth of joy and woe. I pray we turn our faces toward the pain of reality, even as we have faith that we will prevail in the end. May it be so. Amen.
Before we close, I'd like to thank the team who helped make today's service possible. Thank you to the members of our AB team, our visual arts team, for creating the beautiful in-gathering and service slides. Thank you to our membership and pastoral volunteers who have been active in the live chat. We'd love for you to stay in touch. Please join us for our virtual coffee hour. Once we're all in the room, the host will assign you to a random breakout room so that we can have small group social conversations. The URL for the virtual coffee hour will be in the YouTube chat and on your screen after the postlude. Our closing words come from the poet Emily Berry. When someone leaves you, they flow out of you like milk. And if you allow it, you can feed people. Go feed people with the stories in your heart. May it be so.